Welcome, everyone. We see participants coming in, so we'll give folks a few seconds and then we'll get started. Thank you all for joining us today. Okay, I think get started. So good afternoon, everyone. My name is Lauren Belasco, and I'm an assistant professor of political science here at Stockton University. And thank you so much for joining us for today's panel, Protesting and Civic Engagement, Students' Lessons from the Streets, sponsored by the Stockton American Democracy Project, Political Engagement Project on campus. ADP PEP is an interdisciplinary committee of faculty, staff, and students who collaborate to plan and promote programming focused on fostering civic engagement. The faculty co-chair of ADP PEP is with us today, Dr. Claire Abernathy, Assistant Professor of Political Science, and the staff co-chair is Dr. John Frungen, Executive Director of the William J. Hughes Center for Public Policy. I encourage you to check out our website, which we will post in the Q&A to view our upcoming events, as well as our Election 2020 Hub, which is an excellent resource for voters in New Jersey, put together by Dr. Abernathy. Today, we are talking about protesting as a form of civic engagement and as a method for strengthening our democratic institutions. We'll be hearing from Dr. Nusrat Sahin, Assistant Professor of Criminal Justice, about his research on this summer's protests, and we'll have a discussion with several Stockton student leaders about their own experiences leading recent protests. Feel free to submit any questions that you might have to our panel using our Zoom webinar function in the Q&A, and you can submit them as we are discussing, and we'll take intermittent breaks to check in with you. But to begin, I want to offer some brief reflections on protest as a form of political and civic engagement. To protest is to exercise one's political voice, engage in collective action, and equalize the political landscape, because pounding the pavement does not require close proximity to power and financial wealth, both of which are often needed to get the attention of those who govern. Indeed, protesting allows people to draw attention to their cause without money or power. And throughout recent history, we can turn to examples such as the color revolutions in Eastern Europe, the Arab Spring in the Middle East, and the more recent Milk Tea Alliance in Asia, and especially the global movement for Black lives, which reflect the sacrifices and risks taken by citizens to practice democracy, which can often be met with further repression and conflict. But one common thread amongst all of these movements is that in the face of disenfranchisement, discrimination, and violence, citizens demand a political and economic system that recognizes their dignity, identity, and contributions, all of which support the ideal that we truly live in a world where the government is for the people and by the people. Perhaps most importantly, protests call into question the legitimacy of power possessed by those who rule over us. And as Professor Zeynep Tufekci argues, legitimacy, not repression, is the bedrock of resilient power. A society without legitimate governance will not function well. Losing legitimacy is the most important threat to authorities, especially in democracies, because authorities can only do so much for so long to hold on to power under such conditions. In this light, we hold this important conversation today about the protests here in the United States, and more importantly, how young people, such as yourselves, are working towards building a stronger democracy for all of us here. First, I would like to introduce Dr. Sahin, Assistant Professor of Criminal Justice here at Stockton University. Dr. Sahin's research focuses on race, trust, and police legitimacy, police-citizen encounters, terrorism, and police technology. His most recent research explores the motivations for why people participated in protests over this past summer, and he will briefly share some of those findings with us today. And I also want to highly recommend that you attend the lecture Dr. Sahin will be delivering tomorrow for our Globalization Lecture Series at 4:30 p.m. We will also post the registration link in the Q&A so that you can attend, and we hope to see you there. With that said, I'd like to turn to you, Dr. Sahin.
Thanks, Dr. Blasco, for such a great introduction, and you highlighted very significant points about legitimacy of the police, and most of my research is on legitimacy of the police. And I taught a class on protest this spring, and then, when these George Floyd event happened, I decided to go out and join the protesters, and at the same time, I try to understand their motivations to participate in a George Floyd protest. So I have a presentation where I have some preliminary findings of my research, and I would like to start with that. So let me share my PowerPoint with our participants. And all right, so I believe you can see my PowerPoint now. So as we know, on May 25th, 2020, George Floyd was killed in police custody, and he was accused of using a counterfeit bill. And this has a significant impact on police community relations and perceptions of racial profiling. And people have reacted to this killing, and people went onto the streets to protest against overly aggressive and unfair policing practices. So our research was on how police behavior, excessive use of force incidents, and the death of George Floyd shape and define public perceptions of the police. Public perceptions of the police is significant because people tend to obey police orders, or tend to obey, as I said, like obey police orders when they are directed. So it's critical. It's critical in legitimizing the force of the police. So we decided to, as I said, we decided to go to these protests and observe people and recruit some participants for our research. We went to Atlantic City protest. We went to Ocean City protest, Stafford PD protest, and Egg Harbor Township protest. And of course, there was a protest at Stockton University. We also went to that protest. And we handed our cards to the participant, to the protesters, and asked them to reach out to us if they want to talk about their experience and why they came to the protest. And at the same time, with the support of our university, we were able to get this out to the local press, and we shared the link with the local press. And through that link, some people also reached out to us to participate in this research. So this is a qualitative research, and unfortunately, we are still in the process of analyzing data. So I'm not going to talk about all the questions that we asked to the participants, but we basically want to hear people from who attended these protests, and we wanted to hear them about their police brutality, their perceptions about police brutality, racial profiling, trust in the criminal justice system, and excessive use of force by the police. And as I said, we observed some of the local protests. So I've included 4 key topics in here. And the first one is the reason for participating in a George Floyd protest. We asked people, why did you participate in this protest? And the second question was, the second topic that I picked from the data set is expected outcomes of the protest. So what are the expected outcomes? What these people are trying to achieve? And the third question is, what should be done to address racial profiling? We asked about their suggestions. And the last question was their trust in the police. As I said, trust plays a key role in legitimization of a force, which is, in this case, was police itself. I just want to make an introduction to research by giving certain motivations for protest. So in the literature, it's mentioned that people have certain motivations, such as deprivation of immediate needs, a demand for citizenship rights, and a desire for justice for third parties. And we're going to see similar, or we have seen similar findings in our research. So I have a list here of the reasons for participating in a protest after the death of George Floyd. Uh, some people said I attended or I participated in this protest because I don't like how police is treating African American community or the members of the African American community. And some said I participated in this protest to help and support friends in the African American community. So these were white folks who wanted to show their support to their friends and to show solidarity with African Americans. And some people believed it was right to do so, and felt that it's their responsibility to show up in those protests. And some people said, I want to make a statement and stand up for my people. And African Americans usually said, like, we wanted to stand up with my people because, this could have been me, because, I might also be subjected to the police brutality, and I want that to stop. And this was the only thing that I can do to help African American people who are subject to racial profiling. And this is, again, like some participants said, I didn't think any other way. So I said, like, I got to do something. And the best way is to go out and protest and to stand against white supremacy in the law enforcement. So this was also raised. Some people believe that there is white supremacy is a dominant character in the law enforcement, and that's why that needs to be addressed, and that's why they went out to protest. And some also said, I witnessed police corruption and misconduct, and I believe I had to do something about it, and that wasn't one of the opportunities that I had, so that's why I went out. So I have certain quotes from our research here. One of our participants said, I have a 13-year-old daughter, and I think it's important that she learned that you need to stand up for people who can't stand up for themselves. So some people were worried about their future and worried about their children's future. One of our participants said, I saw myself as him because they look at me the same way the law enforcement, he means the law enforcement. And another respondent said, the more we have people involved, the more we can help the issues in our community. So what are the expected outcomes of the protest? People expect for a broader change in the system, but unfortunately, most of them are not optimistic. And again, like I've included some quotes here, and they say, I will be surprised they get convicted because it's business as usual. And another quote, another participant said, I don't have any faith or trust in the so-called justice system. And I feel that it's very difficult to change the system. Like, unfortunately, people are not optimistic about the future, and they don't expect a major change. And some said, I'm hoping to get an attention to racial profiling, and I want to raise awareness. And some are just asking for justice. So we also asked them, like, what should be done to address racial profiling? And they came up with different suggestions. Some people believe there should be more accountability, such as body-worn cameras, or the police complaint processes should be more transparent. And some other people said there should be more diversity in the police force. And I have two quotes here. I don't have time to read them. So as you can see, the people wanted to see more diversity in the police force. And some said aggressive policing practices should not be supported, incentivized. Like, aggressive policing practices, unfortunately, is seen as an effective method to deal with crime or prevent crime. But as I said, some of our participants highlighted that, like, these are harming police community relations. And majority of our participants said we need more training and education for police, and the training might include use of force training or diversity training. So they also mentioned that, like, we can solve this problem by raising the education standards of the police, or training them, or giving them a better training. And Some of our participants also said building the trust in the community is the key here. If the community and the police would trust each other, this problem could be solved. And of course, there are some other suggestions, which includes abolishing the police, but this wasn't mentioned by, or this wasn't approved by many of our participants. It was just a couple of people who said we should abolish the police. So trust in the police, we asked them like whether this incident changed their trust in the police. Some said, actually very few of them said this decreased their trust in the police. Some don't even have a trust in the system or the police. And most of our participants said this doesn't have any major impact on their level of trust. So that's the end of my presentation. Thank you so much. And if you have any questions, let me know. Thanks, Dr. Blasco, again, for giving me this opportunity.
Thank you so much. We now turn to our distinguished group of panelists. We have some questions to get the conversation started, and we'll check in with the audience periodically, so please feel free to post your questions to the Q&A. But first, I would like to introduce who we have for our panel today. First, we have Danielle Combs, who is a political science major and president of Stockton University's NAACP student chapter and the lead organizer for this summer's Juneteenth March for Justice. Danielle is also a member of Mock Trial, the National Honor Society of Leadership and Success, and the Pi Chi chapter of the Alpha Kappa Alpha sorority. Irene Egby, a biology major and dance minor who founded Young Activist of Atlantic County with 3 friends in early June. She is the chair for governmental affairs on the Student Senate, as well as a member of the College Democrats and the African Student Organization. Michael Killebrew, a junior and political science major. He is the president of Stockton University's chapter of Alpha Phi Alpha fraternity and the treasurer of the Greek Council at Stockton, as well as the treasurer for the mock trial team. Michael was part of the organizational team of Black Lives Matter March for Solidarity, Accountability, and Change, a protest in Sicklerville, New Jersey. And finally, we have Amaya Roundtree, a senior who is majoring in forensic psychology and minoring in both cannabis studies and business studies. Amaya serves as president of Stockton's Unified Black Student Society and organized the recent Black Lives Matter protest against police brutality this past September 29th, along with the Stockton University chapter of the NAACP. I welcome all of you today and thank you so much for joining us. So we have a couple of questions to get us started. And my first question to you all is if you could share your experience with protesting and paint us a picture of the type of political engagement you've been involved with over these past 6 months. Danielle, could you get us started?
Sure. Thank you, Dr. Velasco, for that very good introduction. As she already noted, my name is Danielle Combs, and I am a senior political science major, and I serve as the president of Stockton University chapter of the NAACP. Basically, this summer, in the past 6 months, I've been engaged in a few protests. So the one that Michael helped organize, I attended. I attended another one near my hometown in Gloucester County. And then the recent one that I organized on Stockton's campus called Juneteenth March for Justice in June. Aside from protests, my political engagement has been with sending emails to legislators, also making phone calls, and basically working with young leaders and young activists to keep this movement alive.
Thank you. Irene, could you share some of your experiences?
Okay. Hi. Okay, my name's Irene. My political engagement this summer has been mostly protesting, creating my group Young Activists with my friends, which is partly inspired of what happened with George Floyd. I've been to I think about 5 protests, 2 at Stockton and 3 that Yak organized, and then another one in Smithville.
Thank you. Michael.
Hi, how y'all doing? Once again, I'm Michael Killebrew. I'm a junior political science major. If I've been a part of the Black Lives Matter movement for solidarity, accountability, and change, that was on June 7th, 2020. Also been to the Juneteenth March at Stockton that Danielle helped out with, as well as the Black Lives Matter March at Stockton that Maya helped out with as well. Been very inspirational. So yeah, I've been around with a lot of political engagement activity, and I really think it's very, very important that students do that.
Thank you. And Amaya.
Hello, everybody. My name is Amaya Roundtree, president of Stockton's Unified Black Student Society. Over the last few months, the last 6 months, I've been engaged in about 5 protests. I would say, sorry, about 3 in my hometown. It was just Neptune, New Jersey. It was just we had one, and then it was organized. One was organized by the town, one was organized by the people, and then one was just another protest that the people decided they need to have their voices heard again. So I was involved in all 3 of those protests. I was also involved in the protest that Danielle helped plan out with, as long as my Black Lives Matter protest that I did.
Thank you so much. Just a reminder to post your questions in the Q&A chat. We are seeing them come in. We're going to get through a few of ours, and then we'll start addressing the audience questions. Dr. Seam.
Yeah, okay. We have another question for the panelists. So could you talk about what goes into organizing protests, challenges or opportunities you had in organizing your protest? So could you talk about some of your challenges? And let's start with Irene.
Okay. So organizing our protests, it was like our first time ever protesting because we've never been to any. So we were kind of going off what like the information we saw on Twitter and Instagram mostly from lists other people were making and off of like different websites that had the information because we wanted to make sure it was safe and also legal because we didn't want to like get charged with anything and have it like affect us in the future. We also had to figure out how to spread the news. So we kind of like created an Instagram, a Twitter, and a Facebook page in like less than 24 hours to start advertising because our first protest was like 6 days after we decided to have one. Yeah, it gave us an opportunity to figure out how what goes into organizing a protest and made it a bit easier to plan the 2 others we had after that.
Okay, great, thank you. Michael?
All right, so I had a lot of help from my friends that are also on the Winslow Change Committee. We have an Instagram page and we set that up. To organize a protest, it takes a lot of communication. So we planned out the Sicklerville protest a month or so just before that, just to make sure that everything was safe, especially during COVID. The plan was to have the right connections with people in the Sicklerville, like Winslow area, just to make sure that everything was lawful and everything was safe. Because we didn't want, like as she said, we didn't really want anything to come back to us on our resume in the later times. So we plan to promote the flyer that we made a week or 2 before, and we made sure that young people, also adults, knew what was going on in the community, and to make sure that everybody came out as well.
Great, thanks, Michael. And Amaya?
Organizing protests for me was overwhelming, but that's with everything with me. I just had to keep in mind that I wasn't working by myself. I did have the rest of my executive board, as well as I had help with Danielle and the experiences that she had with already planning protests. And to go off of what Irene said, I looked at past protests that I have joined and protests that I saw going across social media, like Twitter and everything. And I just kind of took notes from everything. And I worked with staff, faculty, I worked with students to make sure if there were any messages they wanted to hear. I tried to make our message as meaningful as possible with going into making our flyer. I tried to make it a flyer that'll catch a lot of students' eyes because it was on campus. So we tried to make a flyer, something that would be a video, something that they would see moving across their timeline. And I basically had my public representative. She went through our Instagram account and she sent the flyer out to literally every student that we have. And in our followers, she sent out a video and a flyer with all the information to every single student that we have, That's about over, I'm pretty sure, 800 students or 800 people. So she worked diligently to get the flyers out, to get the word out. And we worked with other people to get apparel. Danielle helped me with getting Matter mask. We made sure that we had apparel to hand out. We made sure that we had water bottles going around. We made sure that we had law enforcement there just in case things got out of hand, which they didn't. And I'm grateful for that. But yeah, although the experience is overwhelming, it does feel good in the end when you see that you finally got your, not finally got your message through, but you were able to get your voice heard.
Wow, Danielle, that's a lot of work. Um, Danielle, Amaya, that's a lot of work. Sorry, Danielle.
Yes, I think Amaya captured it beautifully and perfectly almost. To piggyback off what Michael said, it's a lot of communication and a lot of ahead of the time planning. So you have to gather speakers if you want to have speakers at the protest. You have to gather apparel, like Amaya said. We had to order shirts for the Juneteenth March for Justice. Behind the scenes work, I probably spent like a week or so. The event it began getting planned 2 weeks before it happened. So I spent like a week behind the scenes organizing everything and then only had a week to promote it, which was another reason why I was shocked at the turnout, because it was like I made a brand new Instagram page, and you know how Instagram works, where you don't have followers, nobody's going to see it. So I made a brand new Instagram page for the Stockton University chapter, and it blew up like as soon as I made it. So that was good with the promotion. Aside from like gathering speakers, we reached out to like a pastor, local pastor. So we had to get his confirmation. We had a faculty, a staff member that I had to reach out to as well. And then I also had to go through like the logistics of the administration at Stockton University to make sure that this protest could happen on campus and be carried out in a peaceful manner. So like Amaya said, I reached out to public safety as well. We had masks at ours, we had water bottles, and we had to collaborate with Senate and everything like that, because at the time we were working on a budget for our club because it was getting reactivated. So we had to pull a lot of resources from a lot of places.
Wow, that's impressive. You organize everything in such a short time. Yeah, Dr. Blasco.
Yeah, I think all of you capture how much of the work behind the scenes, right? For an event to go off flawlessly, it requires a lot of hours that oftentimes the people there, we don't always recognize. So thank you for sharing all those details. For the next question, I was wondering if you all could share your perspective or insights about the atmosphere of these protests as you were protesting alongside others. How would you describe the energy, the crowds? Did you confront any counter protests in your work? Yeah, so we'll get started with Michael on this question.
Right. So the atmosphere of the protest, like personally to me, it was kind of a thrill. I was with my good friends, and it was a good feeling protesting. But at the end of the day, we were also protesting for injustice. So you start to think about those people who have been killed and like by police brutality, and you start to say their names louder and louder. So it's kind of that feeling of like I don't know, I wouldn't say euphoria, but kind of like the I don't know, it was a lot. It was a lot. So the energy of the crowd was intense. It was very passionate. And there was a couple people coming down the street, like the counter protesters. It was a couple people. It wasn't really a whole movement against us, but they were saying a couple things, but we couldn't really hear them.
Thank you. Amaya, could you share your thoughts?
The atmosphere for the protests for me was very beautiful. I was filled with a lot of emotions to know that, like, although other people have done it, I was able to bring the campus together for one cause, which is something we don't do a lot. Um, like Michael said, there were a few counter protesters, if you want to call them that. They didn't really interfere with our protests we had going on. I didn't see them at all. The only thing that I was focused on was the message and the protest that was going on. But I did hear that they were like hanging Confederate flags and stuff outside of their windows. And like Michael said, they were doing their low chants, but it didn't really interfere with our message that we were sending out.
Thank you. Danielle.
Yes, overall for me, protesting in general is just surreal. Like every protest I've been to, It's like I know I'm supposed to be here. It's like I think it's because of my passion for social justice is so strong. It's just I know I'm supposed to be in that moment at that time. At the protest that I organized specifically, there was a hiccup in the program, but I wouldn't really call it a counter to anything like that. But it was a little hiccup, but it didn't really interfere with the overall message of the protests and what we were trying to convey and the reason we were protesting. But yeah, pretty much.
Thank you. Irene?
Yeah, I think I can also agree with Michael and Danny about the feeling of the protest. It's like you have a bunch of people that you agree with coming together in one area to represent something that you all feel really passionately about. And my only like experience from counter protesters at my protest was this one woman in a car who like stopped by me on the road and was like, I just wanted to tell you all lives matter.
Thank you. Thank you all so much. I'll turn it over to Dr. Sahin.
Uh, yeah, our next question is about like the people who participated in these protests. It has been one of the most diverse protests maybe that we have ever seen. But do you think were there any voices you felt were missing and would like represented? And let's start with Amaya.
Um, of course, but I'm only saying of course because I feel like there's always more people whose voices need to be heard. You can't always include everybody in one protest. So as protests go on, for example, from my protest, I tried to make it the speakers that we had at the Juneteenth protest with Danielle, I tried to make the speakers at my protest completely different, just so it wasn't like we were hearing from the same people. I know there's other students out there and other individuals out there who have a message they would like to get through. And I just like to be sure that everyone gets heard. So every event we have, we ask students how they feel and everything because that matters. And a lot of students on campus feel like their voices aren't heard at all.
Okay, thank you, Amaya. Danielle, would you like to share your thoughts?
Yes, I agree with Maya. Um, I feel like, well, specifically at the Juneteenth protests, I feel like there was a lot of diverse representation over around. We had the younger generation that came out to protest, the older generation. As far as speakers go, we had older speakers, younger speakers, Black, white, Latino, Asian, LGBTQ speakers. So it was pretty diverse on that end. And then also the crowd that came out was pretty diverse for that as well. As Amaya says, like to piggyback off of her, when we were helping to organize the Say Their Names protest, I had particularly decided not to speak at that protest because I wanted someone else on our e-board to step up and have the chance to have their voice empowered, to have the mic and stuff like that. So I do feel like representation could improve overall because as Amaya says, everyone's not going to be heard in one setting at a time. So, but overall, from the process I've been to, representation has been pretty good.
Okay, thanks, Danielle. And Irene, do you want to add something to your friend's comments?
Yeah, I also agree with both of them. I feel like we need to have more of like people with mental disabilities, more representation for them. Like I know there's a lot of people that get hurt because they don't completely understand what police are saying, and that's like a struggle that my parents have because my brother has autism and he's in college now, and they're kind of worried about something happening to him if he doesn't know like what to do if an officer or something tells him to do a certain thing.
Wow. Yeah, that's really interesting. Maybe police should develop a way to, communicate with people like that. So thanks for uh, highlighting that. And Michael,
Um, One of the things that I wish we had were more old or older than us, more people that came out to represent themselves. But that's okay because we see now that the younger generation is going to change something. change the community, if not change the whole world if we have to. So that's, it's one thing, but I wish it was more representation as a whole in general.
Okay, thank you so much, Michael. And Dr. Blasco?
So you all have touched a little bit on what I'm about to ask you, but just in case there's more that you would like to share, what are some of the key messages and ideas that you hope that these protests conveyed? Danielle, we'll start with you.
Sure. A key message. Well, overall, I think that all of the protests have conveyed the message that we're tired, and as Fannie Lou Hamer said, we're sick and tired of being sick and tired, which is why we're making it a point to get out onto the streets and hold our elected officials accountable. But also the fact that we're all hurting, we're all disappointed, we're all feeling the same feelings together. But we can't lose hope like in this moment. So particularly on campus, that's one thing that I wanted the Juneteenth March for Justice to convey, was that hope is still alive. Like we still have to continue to fight for change. We can't just sit back and just be okay with it. Even if a verdict doesn't go our way, or if we don't receive justice for one case, we have to still keep the hope and keep fighting to push for change. Like a quote that I really like is that the youth is going to match the youth's energy with the older generation's knowledge. And I think that's something that bridge, that connection is really going to help to push the changes forward and give us ultimate justice in the future.
Thank you so much. Irene, would you like to share?
Yeah, I really want these protests to like highlight a visual representation of how many people are paying attention to these issues, that we really need to get them fixed because it's something that affects so many people, so many Americans. That's important. Uh, yeah.
Thank you. Michael?
I would say that our protests try to convey that all lives don't matter unless Black lives matter as well. And so, we wanted the community to understand that, and we wanted to also show that if there's Black people out there that don't understand or might not know or have been bullied into thinking that's not true, we would just say that, your life is significant and is very important and your life does matter as well.
Thank you. And Amaya?
The biggest message that I wanted to convey was unity, and that it should not take us fighting for our lives for us to come together. We should come together on a lot of other aspects in life. There's a lot of other issues that we go through as a whole, as being people of color, that we should come together and fight for. And another message I wanted to convey is that we hear you. If you feel like there's somebody out there that's not hearing you, I hear you. Although whether you feel like it's important, I hear you. We hear you. We're here for you. And if you need help and if you feel like you're scared to say something, this is what we're here for.
Thank you so much. I now want to turn to Dr. Abernathy. I think we've got some questions in the Q&A to discuss with the panelists.
Yes, thank you all so much for sending your questions in through the Q&A. We're going to pause kind of throughout and ask some of them, especially those that touch on topics the panelists have just talked about. So I'd like to start with a question from Kimberly, who asked, was there a moment during those protests that you ever felt concerned for your safety? Was there anyone there that maybe took actions too far? And that could be open to anybody to chime in on. Michael?
I'm gonna go first. So after the protest, there was a couple people that decided, we're going to still keep going with the civil disobedience on the street, and there was a couple people that almost got ran over. So we try to make sure that everybody gets out the way, like we're done for today. I love the energy. It's just the fact that we don't want people to just get run over after a while, So that happened, and also there was another incident where people went out on the streets while the speakers are going on, and they started to chant Black Lives Matter on the streets and kind of block traffic. In which I love the energy. Once again, I love the energy. It's just we don't want people to get run over or get hurt. So that was one of the things.
I can go next to piggyback off of what Michael said. as well as the protests in my hometown. Like he stated, after the protest was over, there were people who still, they were not done protesting. They were not done getting their voices heard. And as he said, there were a lot of people that were going out into the streets, and they were forming, it was like various protesters branching off from the original one, and there were like just people on different parts of the cities just still going around. And there were one major protest where people just wanted to chant in front of the police station, and the police, they weren't really fans of that, and they were asking us to leave. But I'm watching people, and they're getting loud, and they're getting in the police officers' faces, which I love the energy, as you should. But I was just worried about how the police would react to that, because although I understand, as being a person who's trying to get their message heard, they're doing their job. But we just have to, all right, step back. I just wish everybody would have just stepped back. I was just worried about, I didn't want anybody to get hurt while trying to get a message heard, because then that just derails from the whole point of the situation.
Great, thank you. Okay, we do have some more questions, so I think those were great answers, Michael and Amaya. Thank you very much. I do want to ask, this is a follow-up to something one of the panelists raised a few minutes ago. How would you try and get those with mental disabilities better heard in the Black Lives Matter movement?
I just think we need to, when we have our protests, have people who are mentally disabled speak at them, or just have somebody who knows about those issues talk about what goes on in that certain area of Black life.
Great, thank you. Okay, so I'll ask one more from our audience questions now, and then we'll go back to some questions from Dr. Blasco and Dr. Sahin. What kinds of challenges were presented to you in organizing protests during the COVID-19 pandemic? How did you get through these challenges?
I'll start. So some of the challenges, I kind of got through them by addressing them before they became a challenge almost. So I made sure that masks were going to be mandated. We have the First Amendment right that allows us to protest. So that can't really be taken away from us with the quarantine and everything like that. So that wasn't much of a problem with organizing it on Stockton's campus. But I mandated masks. With social distancing, we were outside, so it wasn't much of a problem either. I think I kind of addressed the challenges before they became too big of a problem.
Great.
To piggyback off of what Danielle said, like we weren't allowed, of course, the protests couldn't be inside the facility on campus because of COVID-19 and the restrictions. So like she said, I already nipped it in the bud. Like the protest is outside. People can social distance outside. I made sure that we started on a big field where everybody can spread out and still hear what's going on. And I made sure that when we walk, everybody could spread out. And where we ended up at as well, when we had our speakers speak, that there was enough space for everybody. Everybody didn't have to be on top of each other if they would not like to. And we handed out masks as well. So if some people did not come prepared with a mask, we had masks available for them.
Okay.
I would just quick. We also addressed it before we mandated masks just to make sure that nobody was going around and like spreading anything, and it was outside. So like the social distancing, if you want to social distance, you definitely can. So yeah, it was something like.
So for us, there would be some people who were not able to come because of certain health issues, and they would just, if they wanted to, donate like mask or water or snacks for people to have at the protests. And we were constantly making sure, whenever we were posting about a protest, to write that it was going to be socially distanced and that masks were required, just to make sure nobody was like getting too close and then accidentally spreading COVID around.
That's great. I love the idea of for people that for their own health reasons couldn't join, they still had a way that they could engage with what you were doing. So thank you, Al, for sharing that. We'll have some more audience questions a bit later on, so keep those coming in, and I'll turn it back over to Dr. Velasco and Dr. Sahin for some more questions.
Dr. Sahin, I think you have the next
Yeah.
question.
Yeah, all right. Like the next question is just something that we asked to our participants. It's a very similar question. By the way, I'd like to acknowledge the contribution of Dr. Manish Madan to our research. So we went out to protest together, and we are also together in this project. I just want to, mention his name. So our question here is, why has the political exercising of protest become important to you? And when did you personally make the decision to mobilize and engage this way? So we're going to start with Irene.
Okay, so I started this like I think a week after the accident, not the accident, the incident with George Floyd, because it was like a moment when I think a lot of people were really realizing how awful race relations are in America. I just and protesting in this way is great because it helps you to get a lot of people involved in ways that they might not otherwise be able to. It's accessible to everyone because you just have to go outside. You can make your own sign like this one that somebody donated to us from our first protest.
And sometimes it might be, exciting to make those signs because, my daughter was working on her sign at home. So I believe it's something you want to have. And so let's go to Michael. Michael, do you want to share your thoughts?
Yeah. So I feel like protesting, like exercising your political rights, has always been like something to me. Ever since the incident with Trayvon Martin, I always was like compelled to like ask and understand like why. So it's difficult, but you start to understand like the reasons why like systems are built certain ways and all that. So protesting makes our voices be heard. And if people aren't listening to our message formally through like emails or papers or like oral speeches, getting out there to vote and all that stuff, if nobody's listening to that, then marching on the streets and causing civil disobedience is one of the short list of ways we can get our message across. Because if we don't want to do it violently, but at the same time you don't want to go formally because they're not going to listen to you in the first place. Also, using protests as a political exercise is also something good to like make sure you're using your free speech rights. And it's protests have been used plenty of times back in the day, so it's truly an opportunity to make your voices heard.
Thanks, Michael. Amaya is next.
I've always been involved in political exercising and exercising my rights that I have and my rights to speak. I remember just being young and like people always tell me I have a problem with authority, but I always felt like my message is going to be heard and what I have to say that matters whether you like it or not. This is my message and this is what I have to say. And then it does not have to be conveyed with any disrespect. I always give my messages respectfully, but it was always seen as being having a problem with authority. I feel as though over the years, our cries for our people have gotten louder and stronger as they do every year. And as president of Unified Black Student Society here at Stockton, I felt like it was my job to make sure that the cries of our students and the cries of our people were heard.
Thanks, Amaya. And Danielle, do you want to talk about how you decided to engage?
Yes, so my activism has started a while ago now. I remember it like it was yesterday, which also attests to the fact of my passion today. When I was 4 years old, I witnessed my father being handcuffed and put into the back of a police car just for looking a white police officer in the eye. And in that moment, I was met with feelings of fear, disappointment, and hurt. which is why probably I can recount it as verbatimly today. And then there's been other interactions where my dad has been met with racism as a Black man in America with cops, and that has fueled my activism overall. But more specifically, within the past 6 months, the brutal murder of George Floyd, and also the stories of Breonna Taylor and Ahmaud Arbery, and then the many stories that happened after those cases and the names that weren't filmed, as Irene Stein said, those all help to fuel my passion and explain why I am politically engaged. And then also, like, I'm a political science major, so that goes hand in hand. But then I think the follow-up question was, why do I choose to mobilize and engage this way, like with protest? I feel like, as Amaya and Michael said, because it's important for us to not be silent in this moment. Like, we have to get our voices heard, because if the silent, no, I'm not going to say that quote right now. Maybe for another question. But for us to be silent means we're being compliant, and we don't want to accept what's going on. We need to speak out against it. So I think that's a big reason why I choose to mobilize in protests.
Thank you so much, Danielle. And thanks for sharing your experience or your dad's experience with the police. So Dr. Blasco, for next question.
Yeah, thank you all so much for sharing what you have so far, especially your personal stories. I want to let us maybe think about protests more broadly. Why do you think protest itself is an important act of political engagement in living in a democracy? And Michael, could you get us started with some thoughts?
Yeah, I can give a little basic understanding. So protest is important, especially to minority groups who might not have their voices heard all the time. When the majority of people refuse to hear the problems of the community, there has to be a way to be heard. Like, there has to be. So once people protest, and once the agenda of the protest becomes the majority of people's thoughts, then there starts to be change, and change is very important, especially in government. I don't really know if change happens everywhere, but it has to start. It has to start somewhere. So even a small change must be had, because at the end of the day, we've been protesting for generations, so something has to give.
Mhm. Thank you. Amaya?
Um, to go off of what my speech in the Juneteenth protest, I I'm just like, what did I I'm speechless at the fact that all these years later that we're still protesting and we still have to fight. And that just shows how important it is to not stop fighting, because I know that's what people want us to do. And protesting is probably one of the safest things we can do to get our voices heard, as long as it's conducted correctly and as long as it goes out with as many safety precautions as possible. That's the best way we can get our voices heard.
Thank you, Amaya. Danielle?
Yes, I agree totally. I think that, like I said before, it's our First Amendment right. So we have the right to protest. Why not utilize our rights to begin with? And then I also think that it's a way for us to not only hold our elected officials accountable, but to show them that we're not okay with stuff that's happening. Like, to hold them accountable to make a change in this area, not to basically, because silence is compliance. So to speak out against it, protests are a good way to push, like, ignite the fire for change.
Mhm. And Irene?
Yeah. Okay, so they basically said all the information, but it's also basically how America became America to begin with. People protesting because they believed they were being treated unjustly, and now that's what we're continuing to do. Hopefully, that also leads to a big change in how our country's run.
Mhm. Thank you so much. Dr. Sahin?
Yeah. So I was wondering how, if at all, has your experience with protest led you to reflect on what it means to be an engaged citizen in a democracy? And as you know, like in some other non-democratic countries, citizens even don't have this opportunity to go out on the street. So let's start with Amaya.
Um, as Danielle said, it is our right to protest, and I just feel as though you cannot complain about something without doing any way in any way, shape, or form. Like if you cannot protest, you can donate. Like this stuff like this is free. Although like for our protests, we had to spend money for doing things. Only things we had to spend money on was for water bottles and for masks. The apparel was not necessary. That's just something we wanted our people to have for the protest. You can absolutely conduct a whole protest for free. You can get your voice heard for free. And I feel like it matters. You can't complain about something that's going on, but you're just watching other people fight this battle that you're fighting. And when you yourself know that you're fighting the same battle and you cannot let these people fight alone for your rights.
Thanks, Amaya. And Danielle, would you like to share your thoughts?
Yes, I agree with Amaya completely. I feel like overall it makes me think like people who are willing to protest, it makes me believe that they are like willing to be politically engaged within society, which is a good thing because we know that when you're not politically engaged, you're just basically okay with everything that's happening around you. So I think that protest is a way that for people to get politically engaged in society.
Great. And Irene?
Yeah. I used to think that getting politically engaged was just like, going to vote every year, and that was pretty much all you needed to do. Maybe like retweet something on Twitter. But now that I'm realizing that there's protesting, calling your representatives, informing people about what certain candidates are for and against, there's other ways to get your voice heard besides just voting.
Hmm, okay, thank you. And Michael?
To be honest, oh yeah, first of all, I agree completely with Amaya and Danielle with, being politically engaged. I'm in love with being politically engaged just because I want my community to change and I want my world to change the way that I really see fit. So I feel like all citizens should use their voice, and all citizens have their voice. So if you're not using it, then what's the point? What's the point of having those rights? And so with our First Amendment rights, we should make sure that we use it to our fullest advantage and to get justice and freedom for people that that are put into bad places, bad spaces. So I just hope that unjust laws can be changed, and I hope that unjust people lose the power that they abuse. So that's why I'm here now.
Okay, thanks, Michael. And using your voice to support your friends or your neighbors, that's a great thing. And we appreciate people using their voices and raising up for injustices. So I believe there's like an Q&A time. Uh,
Yes, I have a couple of more audience questions that have come in that I want to make sure we can pose to the panelists. So um, I have, I'm going to put two people's questions together because I think they're really related. So one person asked, what advice would you give students trying to get involved with Black Lives Matter? And then Kenya asked, I'm sure that just like me, there are a lot of people who, when they see a protest, they feel identified with it and actually want to participate, but for some reason don't. What would you say to those people to encourage them to join? So what advice do you have to students interested, and how would you encourage people to join the movements that you all are working with? So again, that's open to anybody.
I can start with that. The most I could say for that is just do it. Simply, all the time that you take of thinking, should I or how I, it's gonna take all that time you were sitting there thinking about it. You could have got the ball moving to do it. Just come together. You could do your research, as we said. We looked at a lot of things on Twitter and being at other press protests, and sometimes I go to protests and I take people's cards and just in case I have questions for future reference. And it's just come together with a group of people that are like-minded like you, who want to convey the same message, and you guys can come together to figure out what resources that you need, so everything's not put on you, because I know how it feels to have one entire event to be put on you. So that's why you make it as easy for you as possible, and don't be scared to ask questions. Never be afraid to ask questions. That's all.
Great, thanks, Amaya. Anyone else want to give words of encouragement or advice for how to get involved in these kind of activities?
Sure. You can start by just joining an organization that does it. So for example, NAACP, we have open membership where you could join, and we're a group of young activists, young leaders who are pushing for the same goals and same mission and same thing, which is change in America. So if you don't feel comfortable with just going to like a protest because you may not know anyone, you can join an organization like NAACP, meet members, and then maybe you'll feel more comfortable going to a protest with them in that way.
Great, yeah, and you can find information on the NAACP at Stockton, as well as the UBSS on Osprey Hub if you are looking for information about when and where they meet and how to get connected to some of the clubs. Check that out.
I would just say, like, I completely agree with both of you. I would just say, get your Nike shoes on and just do it. You know what I mean? You gotta do what you gotta do. And if it's going to keep change, if it's going to change something that you really want change in, you just gotta do it. So can't really think of it as like, all right, I'm on go, basically.
I like that. I like that, Michael. I have one more, and then we'll turn back to some more questions from Dr. Velasco and Dr. Sahin. So Emily asks, where do you think the movement goes from here? What do you think is up next for the Black Lives Matter movement?
I'll start. Thank you, Emily. I think that personally change is going to come. Like I said, with the younger generation is leading this movement right now. So I believe that if we pair our energy with the older generation's knowledge, that something actually can push. Because personally, I don't want another Jacob Blake, or I don't want another Rayshard Brooks or Sandra Bland, or I don't want any more incidents with this. So I think that if we continue to fuel our passion now, change will actually come. And a way that can happen is through protests. Like no one can't tell me that protests don't work, because in some way, some form, they're working. It may not be the justice that we're all looking to see, but justice is ultimately being served.
Thank you all. So we have a couple of questions about lessons. I actually think my question was sort of answered. So Dr. Sahin, if you want to ask your question about lessons, and then we might have a little bit time to talk about safety tips.
Sure. Well, like this is important because what you have learned from your experience may inform future protesters, because we expect to have protests, unfortunately, because this is a part of our democracy. So our next question is, what lessons or takeaways have you learned from your experience? And let's start with Irene.
Okay. I've learned that it isn't as hard to get out there as some might think it is. You organizing a protest, it can kind of be difficult at first, but once you are able to find the right information, connect to the right people, it can get easier as you go. And if you're just coming to a protest that's already organized, you just need to, bring your energy to it.
Okay, great. Thank you, Irene. And Michael, key takeaways?
From the takeaways I take from the protests is just this, like, keep strong and stay motivated, because the feeling of not being motivated is kind of like the worst feeling. Also, I learned that an idea without a plan is surely to be wasted. So make a plan if you can.
Great. And Amaya, lessons learned. What would you say?
A lesson learned, to go off what I said, is to just do. I spent a lot of time over the summer thinking like, how am I going to put this protest together? Like, how am I going to do this? How am I going to do that? And of course, I waited all the way till September to really get the ball moving. When, as Michael said, you have to make a plan. And once you make a plan and you sit down and you break everything down, it kind of becomes easy and you just simply do it. All that time that I spent trying to figure out how I'm going to do it, all I had to do was sit down with my team and make a plan with how we were going to execute it.
Okay, great. And Danielle, would you like to share your thoughts?
Yes. My basically main takeaways is that we're all feeling the same thing. We're all having the same feelings when we attend these protests. So it's easier for us to unite in that way. And we all know that together united will never be divided. So that's just something to keep in mind.
Okay, thank you, Danielle. And Dr. Blasco?
Thank you. So we are going to post some resources on the link, and I mean the Q&A link, as well as on the PEP website. But I just have a quick question. Then we have an audience question I'd really like time for. So maybe what we could do is pose both questions, and I'll let the panelists decide which ones they want to answer, or both. So my question is, how can people exercise their right to protest in a safe and responsible manner? And Dr. Abernathy, could you share the question from the audience?
Yeah, thanks. So Gabrielle asked, what change would you guys like to see? Specifically, how would you like to see the police change? What legislation would you like to see? So two different kind of topics. What advice for safe protest? And then also some of the substantive changes that you'd like to see as we wrap up our conversation today.
We'll start with Michael.
All right, so the first part, to exercise your right, safe and responsibly. So with our process, we contacted the Winslow Police Department just to make sure that we had the space to do it, so they could block off like a couple streets so we can walk and march and protest for that. And all the protesters had each other's back, so like if something happened, whatever happened, we had each other's back with that. With the change, it's a lot. It's so much that like I'm just going to say what I'm thinking right now. So right now I feel like police really do need more police training, as in like when talking about like force, just speaking to citizens in general. I feel like um I feel like there needs to be community policing, people that are in the community that police the community that they're in, just so you can actually make a bond with the people that you're around and actually make sure that y'all are kept safe. Um, People talk about defund the police and all that stuff, and I wholeheartedly agree. We're not going to. I feel like defunding the police is not going to take like ultimately get rid of all the money from the police department, but use some of the money that they have already, which is like a lot, and split it a little bit to make sure that schools are funded, because they're very underfunded, very underfunded. Schools, mental health programs, awareness programs, and all that. It's a lot. It is a lot. So that's what I have right now.
Thank you. Amaya? Oops. Amaya?
To kind of put
Oh, okay.
both answers to the question in one, I feel like a major safety, reaching out to at least a police department in the area you plan on doing the protest.
Oops. I think you're cutting out a little bit. Maybe we'll come back to Amaya. Danielle, and then if Amaya comes back, I think she froze.
Yeah,
Danielle?
my internet dropped off earlier too. Um, with the safety, there's a lot of things you can do to stay safe. With the Juneteenth March for Justice, we were in communication with public safety to make sure that everything remained peaceful. So if you're organizing a protest, you might want to reach out to your local police department to make sure that everything can be done in a safe manner. But then you also can make sure that you bring water. In our COVID-19 pandemic era, you want to make sure you have a mask, maybe hand sanitizer as well. And then also just know your rights. So if things do go left, hopefully they don't, you want to know your rights so that a way you know how to respond in the event, like if you do get arrested. And then for the question from Gabby, Gabrielle, I'm sorry, a change that I would like to see specifically is kind of what Michael already touched on, which is police not defunding the police, but reallocating the funds. It's similar, but defunding the police kind of has a negative connotation to it. So when you say reallocating the funds, it's like saying we want to use the funds because police departments are overly funded. So not stripping all of the funds from them, but using some of those resources into things that'll help benefit and prevent police brutality actions to continue to occur, so that we don't have more victims adding to the long list of names.
Thank you. Irene?
So I'm basically going to say the same thing as Danny and Michael. You should probably contact your police department for whichever area you're going to protest in so that they're prepared for your protest to happen and everything can remain safe and hopefully calm. And for the other question, wait, what was the question again?
The changes that you're interested in seeing about law enforcement or legislative changes that you'd like to see as a result of these protests.
So I'm hoping to see putting more of the police department's budget into community programs that would help lift up the community, so it's less likely that the police are needed, and also putting money towards education for police so they're able to get more training in psychological classes, so they're able to interact with people that may have illnesses that they don't completely understand.
Thank you. Amaya, before we wrap up, you cut off a little bit. I think you froze. I didn't want to overlook any comments that you might have had. So do you have anything else that you want to mention?
No, I was just basically saying that a change I would like to see is better communication with law enforcement and their citizens. To go off of what Irene said, there's times where people are suffering from a disability and they do not understand what's going on. And a lot of police don't take a step back and think about this. Oh, why is that person not responding to what I'm saying right now? The first thing they think about is what they're trying to do. If a person's being disobedient, they take it as somebody's being disobedient without thinking for a second, okay, maybe this person doesn't understand where I'm coming from. I just wish a lot of police officers would take a step back sometimes and just analyze the full situation and not just react off of first instinct of what they're taught to do.
Thank you so much. I want to thank all of our fantastic panelists today. We appreciate your time. We appreciate your stories and also your commitment to making our world a better place. And thank you to Dr. Abernathy and Dr. Sahin for helping organize and participate. We look forward to your research as it evolves, Dr. Sahin. And as a reminder, please attend the Globalization Lecture Series event tomorrow at 4:30 p.m. And this is a recording, so we will post it on the PEP website. So if you want to go back and rewatch it, it'll be there for you. Thank you all so much, and we hope you have a wonderful day. Take care.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.